My name is Jenna Carrow. I am 31 years old, and I built my education startup from a small desk in an attic apartment in Cambridge. At 7 o'clock on that Sunday morning, I woke up in the old living room of my parents' house in Brookline, and my heart dropped into an empty space. The business account of Ascended Labs, the fund I had scraped together through years of side jobs and countless sleepless nights, every single one of the $95,000 in my account was gone. I walked downstairs and asked my father Ralph whether he knew anything about it. He didn't even look up. It was just sitting there, he said, his voice as casual as if it meant nothing. We just had an opportunity. Before I tell you where the money is now, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And hit subscribe if you've ever had to protect your future from the very people who built your past. I wish I could see what happened this morning as an accident, but the truth is, it was just another loop in my life. Since I was young, I had grown used to my father, Ralph Carrow, standing in the middle of the living room, speaking excitedly about a guaranteed win deal or a revolutionary project. Those stories usually ended with nothing, just another debt, another empty promise, and a few more things in the house disappearing in exchange for cash. My mother, Lorraine, would always stand behind him with a soft smile, as if believing hard enough could magically fix everything. What happened this morning reminded me of when I was 10 years old, a memory I thought time had blurred, yet all it took was one shock for it to return with sharp, painful clarity. That day, my grandfather came down from Worcester, carrying a beautifully framed antique star chart. He placed it in my hands and smiled. "Jenna, you need to keep this. It's for someone who knows how to look up at the sky." I hung it right above my desk. And every night, I would sit and admire the tiny, shimmering constellations. 1 week later, it was gone. I searched every corner of the house, opened every drawer, and lifted every stack of books, until I found my father standing in the garage, a cigarette between his fingers, his eyes avoiding mine. I showed it to an investor. "They loved it," he said casually. My heart sank, but I was too young to understand fully. 2 days later, while washing his coat, I found a pawn shop ticket worth $45. I still remember that exact feeling, my throat tightening and my hands turning so cold they trembled. A star chart, the first gift my grandfather gave me for my dreams of learning, had been exchanged for a few dozen dollars, for yet another guaranteed win opportunity. In that moment, I understood one thing. Anything that belonged to me, once it entered my father's hands, could disappear. When I asked him about it, my voice was shaking so much, I had to bite my lip to stay steady. He simply waved his hand. "There's no need to keep tabs in the family. Sweetheart, I'm just borrowing it." Borrowing it. That phrase followed me throughout my childhood each time something went missing. Each time my savings was used for something important. Each time my father needed something that belonged to me. To him, boundaries weren't something to respect. They were something to ignore whenever convenient. At 18, I left that house with 2 suitcases of cheap clothes, a scholarship, and $600 saved up from part-time jobs. I remember standing at the door, gripping the handles of my suitcase, thinking, from now on, none of them can touch my future again. I believed I had closed that chapter. Until this morning, when I stood in the old living room, staring at the near-zero balance in my startup account, my heart clenched. And I realized they never stopped. I was just naive enough to think they would change. I just don't understand why they cared about me so much that day. The Admiral's Row Banquet House in Boston had never been a place that belonged to my family. It was too bright, too luxurious, and too full of the things my parents usually admired only through store windows. And yet, that day, everything inside seemed to belong to them. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft golden glow. Glasses clinked lightly, and the smell of roasted meat, mixed with expensive perfume, formed a thin mist of artificial elegance. I walked in and felt my chest tighten as if I were stepping into a stage play. And my family had rehearsed their roles long before I arrived. "Micah, my younger brother, ran straight to me and gave me a tight hug. "You're here. We've all been waiting for you." I smiled and thanked him. At least, in that entire room, Micah remained the one constant light. But when I looked around, nothing felt normal. My parents had no means to host an event in a place like this. I sensed something was off, but I couldn't name it yet. Less than 3 minutes later, my father, Ralph Carrow, had already hooked his arm through mine, pulling me through the crowded room as if I were his newest trophy. "This is Jenna, my daughter," he announced, louder than necessary, the mind behind the education platform making waves in Cambridge. I nodded politely, keeping a practiced smile. The things he said were never expressions of care. They sounded more like lines from an advertisement meant to inflate his own worth. Lorraine, my mother, appeared with a smile so bright it felt almost artificial. "Sweetheart, I heard your project is about to receive funding. Is the new investor demanding? Do you need me to help you prepare anything?" I awkwardly touched the rim of my wine glass, avoiding her gaze. They hadn't asked me questions like that in years. Why? Were they suddenly this interested tonight? They asked about me, but never asked whether I was okay. While making small talk with guests, I began to observe more closely. The sofa in the corner of the room, I tilted my head down and saw the price tag still stuck to its leg. The decorative lights were beautiful, almost too beautiful for their budget. Walking closer, I spotted the logo of a company that rented event furniture. Outside the door, my father's shiny silver SUV still had a temporary dealer plate attached. He stood still, the smile fading slowly. My family didn't have the money for any of this. The last time I visited, they were debating whether to sell things from the garage for extra cash. The only thing they ever had in abundance was delusion. The party went on for another hour before my mother pulled me aside. Her eyes glistened. Her voice trembled in the way I had known since childhood. "Jenna, I know you're so busy, but today is my 55th birthday. Your father prepared a slideshow, but the old laptop froze. Could you help him fix it? Just make me happy today. That's all I want." I looked at her for a long moment. I knew Lorraine wasn't cruel. She simply preferred living in a world where everything looked perfect, even if it was rotting underneath. I sighed and nodded. "All right, Mom, I'll take a look." A simple sentence, but it was the doorway into the most elaborate trap my family had ever set. Ralph led me into a small office behind the stage. White fluorescent light fell on the old laptop, coated in a thin layer of dust. He played his role perfectly anxious, frantique, fumbling as if that slideshow were the most important thing in his life. I opened the laptop. It ran so slowly it felt like it was gasping for air. I tried a quick fix, but the network driver was corrupted. To download the patch, I had to log into my personal email and my company account. As I typed my passwords, a small blinking light flickered from the edge of the desk, a hidden camera I hadn't noticed before. A chill ran down my spine. But before I could ask anything, Ralph placed his hand on my shoulder. "Help your mother. Sweetheart, this is the day she's been looking forward to." That moral pressure made me ignore my instincts. I continued. The laptop's hard drive light began blinking. Too fast. Too constant. I frowned slightly, but I assumed it was because the laptop was ancient, so I didn't pay much attention. Ralph stood behind me, unusually silent. I didn't turn around. I just wanted to finish and leave that strange little room. No one said anything else. But right then, the keylogger was capturing every password, every email, and every authentication code perfectly. I finished fixing the slideshow in about 20 minutes. My family laughed and embraced joyfully when I returned to the banquet room. Ralph raised his glass, his eyes shimmering as if everything in life were wonderful. And me, I felt as though I had left a part of myself behind in that small office. The night passed peacefully, as if nothing had happened. But in reality, that was the moment everything began to collapse. I didn't know that every key I pressed that night was opening a door for them to walk straight into my life. If I had known that night would be the last time I slept without fear, maybe I would have cherished that moment more. The early light in Brookline Village slipped through the curtains as pale gray streaks. I was still wrapped in a thin blanket on my old bed, the bed I had slept on throughout high school. Before leaving home at 18 with 2 suitcases and the determination never to return, my phone on the table buzzed. Once, then twice, then 3 times. I frowned slightly and reached for it. The screen was flooded with notifications. Unusual activity alert. Withdrawal notice. Wire transfer completed. I opened my banking app, my palms dampening, as if my body knew what was coming before my mind did. The company balance Ascended Labs, which had been over $95,000 last night, was now just $103. I held my breath, stared, closed the app, reopened it, switched from Wi-Fi to data. I told myself maybe the system was glitching, but the number stayed there bare and ice cold. I put the phone down, hearing my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My throat tightened as if squeezed by an invisible hand. No. No way. Not now. Right when my company was about to demo our beta build for investors. It took several seconds before I even realized I had been holding my breath. I called the bank immediately. My hands were shaking so much I had to put the phone on speaker. The bank representative spoke in a calm, polite tone the kind people use when they're delivering bad news but aren't allowed to sound emotional. Yes. Ms. Carrow. We've checked. All transactions were authenticated with the correct password and correct 2-factor verification codes. I shot upright. That's impossible. I didn't make those transactions. Ma'am. The sound of typing clacked softly. The IP address matches the network currently being used at the address you're staying at. The room seemed to freeze. They were saying, the money was transferred from inside my family's house. Do you suspect anyone else might have access? My voice came out rough. No. No one. But inside me, one name surfaced. Then a second. I lifted my eyes toward the old laptop on the desk, the same laptop I had opened last night. I logged into my email and entered multiple authentication codes. As I walked closer, I sensed something small but wrong. Its position was slightly shifted from where I had left it. A tiny detail, but enough for the memories of last night to flood back like a breaking dam. The hard drive LED was blinking in an odd rhythm. Ralph standing behind me, watching too closely, the tiny camera in the corner, their strange, exaggerated concern all evening. The fragments began snapping together, forming a terrifying picture. I wasn't sitting on the bed anymore. I stood up abruptly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear each beat. I ran downstairs. Ralph and Lorraine were eating breakfast, chatting softly as if nothing in the world was out of place. I placed my phone on the table. Did you take the money from my company account? Ralph didn't look at me. He continued spreading butter on his toast. Don't make a big deal out of it, he said flatly. Money sitting there is a waste. We've got a big opportunity. I looked at my mother, hoping foolishly to see some hint of guilt. But she only gave a strained smile. Jenna, you have to understand. Family helps each other when needed. Something inside me cracked. Not shattered. Cracked along old fractures that now returned sharper than ever. I used to think I was used to them taking things from me. But this time, they stole my entire life. The smell of hot coffee rising from the table made me dizzy. The spinning sensation pulled me down into fragments of old memories. The star chart from my grandfather was pawned for $45. The new bike at 13 that was borrowed by a neighbor for a few days and never came back. My savings were advanced for one of Dad's business ventures. My old laptop was stripped for RAM because he needed it temporarily. Each time, I heard the same sentence in a family. Why keep track of things? But this morning, I finally understood what I had avoided for years. This wasn't an accident. This was a system, a pattern, a model of intrusion, and I had been playing the role of the child who endures. I wanted to scream, throw the phone against the wall, ask them, why is it always me? Why does no one ask how I feel? but I knew it was pointless. I had screamed before, cried, begged, and in return, I had received blame and gaslighting. So this time, I stayed silent. I turned around, walked upstairs, and packed my things with movements so cold they felt mechanical. Bag, laptop, charger, documents. No one said a word. Ralph kept eating. Lorraine poured more coffee. As if I didn't exist. I walked out the front door. When it closed behind me, that small click sounded like a declaration. I left my family. For the second time in my life, when I called Micah, his voice was still sleepy. "Are you okay?" I could hear genuine worry, something I rarely received from anyone in that house. "Micah, they took my money." The other end went dead, silent. Then he exhaled deeply. "Jen, you know what Dad's been bragging to relatives all week, that he's about to close the biggest deal of his life?" My heart sank. The illusion Ralph had built for years had finally revealed itself. I dialed Aunt Harriet, the only person in the family who had never treated me like a resource. She answered after 2 rings. Her voice was completely alert. "Jenna, what's happened?" I barely whispered Auntie. "They emptied my company account. I have nothing left." She paused for a few seconds. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of someone who already suspected this day would come. Then she said each word slowly and clearly. "This is no longer a family matter. This is financial crime. Come to me right now." I bit my lips so hard I thought it might bleed. At last, I had heard the words I needed for years. "You're not crazy. You're not exaggerating. You've been harmed." I sat in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel. No crying, no trembling, only a cold clarity spreading through me. I looked at the house behind me, the place that held both my childhood and my deepest wounds. And I understood. This time, I would fight, not to get the money back, but to reclaim my life. I thought every pain had reached its limit, until Aunt Harriet said something that chilled me to my core. The diner sat on the edge of Interstate 95. Its neon sign flickering unevenly, and the faint smell of burnt coffee drifting through the air. I walked in, the cold from outside still clinging to my coat. Aunt Harriet was already seated at the table by the window, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. I sat down, and just by the look in her eyes, I knew I didn't need to explain anything with long, stumbling sentences. "Auntie," my voice was hoarse. "They took everything. All $95,000. Aunt Harriet set her cup down. "No panits." No shock. Her eyes simply sharpened the sharpness of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion they've carried for a long time. "Tell me every minute of it," she said, and so I did the party. My mother asking me to fix the slideshow, the old laptop, the blinking LED lights, the hidden camera. And this morning when Ascended Labs' account showed only a little over $100, Harriet listened without missing a single detail. When I finished, she let out a long breath, not relief, but the sorrow of having an old fear proven true. "Jenna, this is no longer a family misunderstanding." She placed both hands on the wooden table, fingers interlaced, and said clearly, "This is a cyber attack. A financial crime. Not borrowing. Not confusion. Not your parents getting carried away." My heart tightened. But they're my parents. Harriet looked straight into my eyes. "Parents don't have the right to steal your passwords. Install a keylogger. Take $95,000 from your company. And use your 2-factor codes to legitimize it. Jenna, this is a felony. You weren't just betrayed. You were victimized." A heavy silence settled over the small table. I placed my hand on the coffee cup, not remembering when I ordered it. The wooden surface beneath my fingers felt ice cold. It was as if everything I had ever believed about family was being torn apart layer by layer. Harriet paid quickly, then drove me to a small office in Back Bay. The brass sign outside the door read, "Meredith Shaw, Cyber and Financial Law, Inside, warm yellow light shone onto a dark wooden desk. Whiteboards filled with notes and network diagrams covered the walls. Meredith Shaw. Short silver hair. A stern but intelligent face looked at me for a few seconds and then asked, without preamble, "Where's the laptop?" I handed it to her. Meredith powered it on, plugged a diagnostic USB into the side port, and her eyes narrowed like a laser beam. In less than 5 minutes, she turned around. There's a keylogger, intentionally installed, running in the background the entire night. The driver history was modified. This wasn't amateur work. My hands turned cold. Meredith continued. Unflinching Jenna. This was a targeted attack. Whoever did this knew exactly what you would type into that laptop. I bit my lip to keep from breaking down in front of her. Harriet and Meredith went through each element. Driver, download history, timestamp identical to when I tried fixing the machine. Keylogger logs. Every key I typed, IP data, confirming every transfer originated from Ralph and Lorraine's. House transaction timeline, from 217 to 348A. Two-factor authentication codes captured from my phone when I lit up the screen in that dark office. Harriet looked at the evidence and whispered, "This wasn't random. Jenna, it was planned." I gripped the edge of my chair. The room suddenly felt suffocatingly small. Meredith scribbled notes rapidly. "We have enough to file immediately. But Jenna needs to understand. This is the beginning of a real legal battle." I lifted my head. My eyelids felt heavy, but my gaze was clearer than ever. Meredith put her pen down, then said the sentence that sent a chill through me. "Once you sign this filing, you will no longer have parents in the true sense of the word." My entire body froze. Images flickered in my mind, Ralph running beside me when I learned to ride a bike at 4. Lorraine brushing my hair before a school performance. Our family was eating roasted chicken on Christmas Eve when I was 12. But then came the other images. The star chart was pawned for $45. The bike that never returned the savings borrowed temporarily. And now, the $95,000 representing my life's work. I understood. Family isn't defined by blood. Family is defined by the people who don't take what belongs to you. I whispered, "I understand. And I'm ready." Meredith drove us to the Boston Police Department Cybercrime Unit. The waiting room smelled of fresh paper and echoed with the constant tapping of keyboards. A young officer received the file. I signed the statement. The pen trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of truth turning into ink on white paper. Beneath my signature, I saw my name, Jenna Carrow, victim. I inhaled deeply. I had officially stepped out of the role of the dutiful child and into the role of the woman who protects herself. Boston's sky was overcast, with wind from the Charles River stinging cold against my skin. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my coat. Harriet laid a hand on my shoulder, gentle but steady. "You did what the women in this family have never dared to do. You broke the cycle." I pressed my lips together, my eyes burning. I knew she was right, but I also knew victory wouldn't come easily. I looked at the gray clouds in the distance. A strange, uneasy feeling stirred inside me. I thought everything had been handed over to the law, but I didn't know that just a few hours later, Aunt Harriet would discover she was also a victim with a number even more horrifying than mine. I thought my pain had reached its limit, until Aunt Harriet called me near midnight with a voice I had never heard from her before. Boston's night draped a thin layer of mist over every roof. After leaving the police station, Harriet drove back to her quiet little house in Medford, a place where everything was always tidy and orderly, just like the way she had lived her entire life. That day, everything changed. As she was preparing a cup of chamomile tea to soothe her headache, her phone buzzed. An email from the bank appeared, unusual activity in retirement account. Harriet tapped the notification. When the number flashed on the screen, she froze as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her account with over $300,000 was gone. Not a dollar left. She blinked repeatedly, thinking she had misread. Maybe the app glitched. Maybe the signal was weak. Maybe it was the rain outside. Harriet logged in again. The balance was still $0. Not a single cent. No warning. No alert. Then she scrolled to the transaction history. Each withdrawal occurred at the exact same hours Jenna's $95,000 had been taken. 2:19 a.m. 2:42 a.m. 3:03 a.m. Harriet's breath caught. There was something even more painful than losing money. It was realizing she had been deliberately betrayed by the very little brother she helped raise. Neare 11 p.m. I was sitting on my bed, clutching my work journal, trying to keep my mind from falling apart. My phone lit up. Aunt Harriet glowed on the screen. I answered instantly. Jenna. Her voice was so weak I barely recognized it. Can you come to my house right now? Something serious happened. Within seconds. I was out the door. Jacket in hand. As I drove, Boston's drizzle tapped against the windshield, and the streetlights scattered into trembling streaks of gold across the wet pavement. When I stepped into Harriet's house, she was sitting at the kitchen table, head lowered, her hands still trembling. She pushed her iPad toward me. Jenna, I lost everything too. Over $300,000. All gone. Exactly the same way as yours. I stared at the screen. The red negative numbers glowed like knives pressed into my chest. I whispered, breath tight. Auntie, the transaction times. They're identical to mine. Harriet only nodded. Tears fell onto the wooden table, quiet and heavy. After several moments of silence, Harriet began to speak. Her voice dropped low, dry, and cracked, as if every word scraped across an old wound. Ralph asked me to invest in some real estate automation AI project. He said it had major investors, and said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I clenched my fists. I gave him $150,000. He signed a proper loan note. Then a few months later, he said he needed more funds to close an international contract. Harriet paused. Her eyes reddened. I gave him another $150,000. Then he said negotiations were ongoing. And after that, he vanished. I exhaled sharply, part shock, part heartbreak. Harriet didn't deserve this. I didn't want to tell you because I was ashamed. She continued. I've been an accountant my whole life. Yet I let my own little brother fool me with a few lofty promises. We brought Harriet's laptop to the living room. Meredith, our attorney, was waiting on a video call. Send me the emails Ralph used to contact Harriet, Meredith said. Harriet forwarded them immediately. In less than 10 seconds. Meredith sighed. This email address uses a fake domain. The domain was purchased from a low-cost service. The company logo is a template. And the AI project documents. She opened the file. These are internet templates, with a few words swapped. Harriet didn't speak. A second later, she covered her mouth. Her shoulders trembled. I felt heat rising in my chest, a burning mix of pain and fury. Harriet sank onto the living room rug, no longer able to maintain the strength she wore every day. Her voice escaped like a strangled sob. I raised him from when he was 4. I got him into college. I paid off his debts. And he looked me in the eyes and lied to me. I knelt beside her and wrapped my arms around her. I could hear her heart pounding a terrified rhythm, as if she feared her own family. You don't deserve this, I whispered. In that moment, I realized Ralph hadn't just taken money from her. He had taken her trust, something she had spent her entire life protecting. On the screen, Meredith continued, voice steady and certain. Jenna, Harriet, these two incidents show an extremely clear recurring pattern. She laid out each point, exploiting family ties, inventing investment opportunities, gaining access to login credentials, nighttime transfers, using multiple proxy accounts, covering tracks by deleting logs. This is no longer a family matter. This is systematic criminal behavior. Harriet wiped her tears. What do we do next? Meredith answered plainly. If you both agree, I will submit the file requesting FBI involvement. This has federal fraud indicators. I looked at Harriet. Harriet looked at me, and we both nodded. The room fell into a heavy silence. Outside, the rain beat steadily against the porch, like the city exhaling in sympathy. I looked at Harriet, the only woman in the family who had never taken anything from me except love, and I saw something that had been hidden for years. Ralph didn't just see me as a bank. He saw every woman in this family as a resource to extract from when needed. This wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was a pattern. And I knew, if we didn't stop him, more people would be hurt. I stepped out onto Harriet's porch. Boston's rain fell hard, soaking through my shoes. I looked down at my reflection in the wet tiles, a small figure, but no longer standing with her head bowed. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, this is no longer just my fight. This is a battle for the entire family, and I will be the one leading it. When the Boston sun had barely risen, I understood that today was no longer a day for pain. Today was the day we began to fight. The dim morning light slipped through the thin curtains, leaving soft golden streaks across the wooden floor. I woke with a strange feeling, my body heavy, but my mind clear as if sleep had washed away the last remnants of weakness inside me. I stepped out of the room, and the smell of roasted coffee drifted from the kitchen. Harriet stood there, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her hand resting on a warm cup of coffee. On the table lay an open laptop, a stack of printed papers, and the colored pen she always used when analyzing financial records. I didn't have to ask. I knew she had been up for hours. Did you sleep at all? Jenna, she asked. Better than I expected, I replied. Harriet nodded. It seemed we both understood that today marked a shift. No more crying. No more asking why. No more hoping the people who refused to change would suddenly become different. This was the time for action. Near 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Meredith walked in with a large leather briefcase. Her expression, stern, but alert. She placed the documents on the table, opened her laptop, and within minutes, the small kitchen transformed into a proper war room. I'll be direct, Meredith began. To win, we need strategy. No one wins a battle on emotion. Harriet straightened her back. I picked up a pen. We were both ready. Meredith laid out the entire timeline of the case. The time the keylogger was installed, the moment Jenna entered her passwords, the exact timestamps of Jenna's transactions, the timeline of Harriet's $300,000 withdrawals, the connected proxy accounts. Everything pointed to one person, Ralph Carrow. The air felt dense, but not with despair. With clarity, Meredith lined up each objective on paper, stating them like commands. First, recover the full $95,000 taken from Jenna. Second, recover the $300,000 stolen from Harriet's retirement fund. Third, finalize the federal financial fraud file. Fourth, hand over all evidence to the FBI after the confrontation. Fifth, file for a temporary asset hold so Ralph can't transfer his property. Harriet exhaled softly. I felt the weight of each sentence, but also something new: hope. For the first time in years, we saw a real path forward. Meredith stepped aside to give us a moment. Harriet placed a hand over her chest and inhaled deeply. What hurts me the most isn't the money, she said. It's that I trusted him enough to let him take everything I saved in a lifetime. I squeezed her hand. I trusted my father too. Trusted that one day he would finally see who I really was. Harriet gave a sad, knowing smile. Maybe we both thought we were strong, but really, we were just living on old hope. I nodded. But today, we're different. Harriet looked at me, her eyes brighter. Yes, today, we end the cycle. The kitchen warmed not from the coffee, but from the truth we had finally grasped. This confrontation wasn't about revenge. It was about rescuing ourselves. Meredith returned to the table and wrote 3 options on the whiteboard. Option 1, meet Ralph at his house. The goal is to assess his reaction and show him we have complete evidence. Option 2, deliver a formal demand for repayment immediately. Option 3. Submit everything to the FBI right after the confrontation and request an open investigation. Harriet didn't need a single second to respond. I want to look him in the eyes. I want to hear what he says. I won't hide anymore. I looked at her, then nodded. I'll go with you. Meredith nodded slowly. I'll prepare everything. The air thickened with determination. No more trembling. No more backing down. Meredith began coaching us like a strategist, preparing soldiers. No yelling. No crying. No mentioning the past. Don't say we're family. Don't say why. Keep everything factual and legally grounded. Harriet repeated her line, return the retirement money I saved my entire life. I repeated mine. Return the money you stole from my company. Meredith added fraudsters crumble when faced with truth, especially when the truth is delivered calmly. Something inside me shifted. I no longer felt like a wounded daughter. I felt like a woman preparing to defend the life she built. By the end of the session, we stood before a board filled with detailed planning, confrontation time, location Ralph's house, and possible reactions he might have, each person's role documents to bring steps after the confrontation. I looked at Harriet's bold blue handwriting. Each stroke carried a lifetime of strength and sorrow. My heart beat once hard. Harriet looked at me, her voice low but steady. Tomorrow, everything changes. I inhaled deeply, and for the first time, I said something that even surprised me. Tomorrow, I will look straight at the man who destroyed my family. And for the first time, I won't be afraid of him anymore. I once thought I would never be strong enough to stand in front of my father. But that morning, when I stepped out of Harriet's house, I knew I was no longer the girl I used to be. Boston's morning was colder than usual. A thin layer of mist covered the roofs of Medford, and the gray sky looked like water about to break into waves. I sat at Harriet's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a hot cup of coffee, but the warmth wasn't enough to soften the tension inside me. Harriet stood by the window, the cold light reflecting off her silver hair, making her look both powerful and exhausted. "Are you ready?" Harriet asked. I drew in a long breath. "I'm ready." Right then, Meredith walked in. She carried her familiar leather briefcase, placed it on the table, and opened it as if she were preparing for a military strategy meeting. "We have only one mission," Meredith said. "Stay calm, present the truth, and do not, under any circumstances, let Ralph control the conversation." Harriet and I both nodded. Silence settled over the kitchen. This wasn't a family visit. This was a confrontation. We drove to Ralph's house around 10 a.m. The house appeared in the quiet neighborhood large. Its exterior painted a suspiciously bright white, with perfectly trimmed hedges that looked more like props, meant to hide something inside. Harriet stared at the house for a long moment. "I used to think this meant he was doing well," she murmured. "Now, all I see is pretense." I gently held her hand. When we stepped onto the front porch, the door opened slowly. Ralph appeared, wearing the smile I had seen all my life, the smile of a man who believed he could bend everything to his will. "Well, Harriet, Jenna, what a surprise," he said. His voice held surprise, but his eyes didn't. I knew instantly he had anticipated this. We stepped into the living room. Ralph's house was spacious but strangely cold. No family photos. No signs of connection. Just expensive objects arranged for show. Ralph sat on a leather chair, arms crossed, as if he still held the upper hand. I heard there's something to discuss. Harriet began. "Well," Ralph chuckled lightly, "I know Jenna's misunderstood a few things. Probably work stress. Families. You know, sometimes we just help each other out." Jenna misunderstood. Families help each other. My stomach tightened. I remembered Meredith's words. Do not react emotionally. I straightened my back and looked at him without blinking. "You transferred $95,000 from my company account at 3 a.m. Ralph raised an eyebrow. "I only borrowed it. I planned to return it when my project succeeded. Harriet glanced at me. I stayed calm. You used my passwords and the verification codes from my phone. Silence stretched for several seconds. The air thickened. Ralph's expression stiffened. I placed a stack of papers on the table in front of him. Bank statements. Keylogger logs. IP records. Transaction timestamps. Ralph flipped through them, his lips tightening. I don't remember everything, he muttered. Maybe a device malfunction. Or maybe no one but you had access to that laptop. I said. No one else knew. Mom asked me to fix the slideshow that night. For the first time, Ralph looked at me without the smile. He faltered, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. That was the moment he realized this battle wouldn't be easy. Harriet placed another stack of papers on the table. I saw the slight tremble in her hand, but her voice was completely steady. You took $300,000 from me. Ralph jolted as if struck. Harriet continued. These are the retirement account statements. These are the emails you used to request investment funds. And these are the AI project documents you copied from an online template. Her voice wavered, but she did not. I don't need explanations. I only want the truth. Ralph shot up from his seat, pacing the room like a trapped animal. I did everything for this family, he shouted. I'm the only one carrying the burden. Neither of you understands anything. No. We understood too well. It continued. Unleashing a flood of excuses. I paid for your schooling. I sacrificed my whole life. I just needed a little help from my own family. Harriet stood. Stop. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. You didn't sacrifice. You were exploited. You didn't carry burdens. You stole from the people who loved you. Ralph froze. I had never seen Harriet like that, unwavering. Centered. Fearless. A woman who had finally recognized her own worth. I stepped beside her. You've hurt both of us long enough. Ralph stared at us, his eyes hollow. He knew there was no way back. Meredith stepped out from the hallway, placing a thick envelope on the table in front of him. This is a formal demand for full repayment of the stolen funds. If you fail to respond within the required time frame, this case will be escalated to the federal level. Ralph stared at the envelope, his face draining of color. His hand trembled. Silence swallowed the room so complete I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. I stood there, looking at the man who had once been the person I feared most, and I realized he no longer held any power over me. This was the end of the confrontation. But Ralph's public downfall was only beginning. I once thought Ralph only feared losing money, but it turned out what he feared most was losing the ability to control others. That evening, only a few hours after the confrontation, my phone began buzzing nonstop. Messages from Ralph poured in like a storm, long, frantic, and fragmented between accusations and pleading. Jenna, someone is manipulating you. Family must stay together. You're destroying everything I've built. Answer me. Do not stay silent. I looked at those messages, and for the first time, the pain wasn't there. Only a quiet kind of exhaustion. Harriet sat at the kitchen table, her cardigan draped loosely over her shoulders. She read a few lines Ralph sent and sighed. This is the first time he realizes his power doesn't work on anyone anymore. Meredith looked up from a stack of documents. This reaction is completely normal when a manipulator loses control. Do not respond. Not a single word. I closed my phone, for the first time in my life. The silence belonged to me, not to Ralph. The next morning, Meredith received an email confirmation from the bank. Ralph's accounts had been temporarily frozen due to the strength of our evidence file. She read it aloud to us. The bank confirmed signs of unusual access, potentially linked to misuse of a business account. Protective measures activated. Harriet placed a hand over her mouth. So the first step is done. I felt something strange, not triumph. Not joy. Just a long, slow exhale. At the same moment, Harriet's phone kimmed. A new message from Ralph. Harriet. You betrayed me. I need money right now. My accounts are frozen. Harriet deleted the message without replying. My whole life used to revolve around responding to him. She said quietly, "Today, I won't do that anymore." 2 days later, the news spread faster than we expected. A court SUV pulled up in front of Ralph's pristine house. 2 officers stepped out, holding clipboards and a seal for property seizure. Ralph stood in the middle of his living room, hair disheveled, face pale. They went down the list of valuable assets: the television, the watch collection, the wall art bought on credit, and the expensive gifts he once bragged about. Everything was being readied for repossession. Neighbors gathered on their lawns. Watching, Ralph tried to smile, tried to pretend everything was a misunderstanding, but no one believed him. From the SUV, I watched it all. The man who once shouted orders, who once silenced an entire household, now looked like a faded shadow. Harriet placed a hand on my shoulder. "His time is over." That night, while we were having dinner, Meredith received an email from the Federal Investigation Unit. The FBI has accepted the preliminary file. They request additional data confirming unauthorized transfers and evidence of the keylogger. Harriet set her spoon down gently. "Oh my God," Meredith reassured us. "Don't worry. This is just the next step. When federal fraud is suspected, investigation is mandatory." I stayed silent. I didn't want Ralph jailed or dragged away, but I also couldn't protect him anymore. Not after everything he did. 3 days later, Ralph received an official summons from the investigation office. I wasn't there when he arrived, but Meredith saw him walk into the building and described it. He wore a wrinkled coat, his tie crooked. His face was swollen from lack of sleep. He kept looking around like he feared being recognized. None of his old bravado remained. That afternoon, I stood by the window of Harriet's apartment and saw Ralph walking down the street. On foot, not driving, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders slumped. I thought of my childhood, the shouting, the humiliation, the times he borrowed temporarily and never returned a dime, the way he looked at me, like I was just a resource. But today, watching him walk past, I wasn't afraid anymore. I only saw a man who had destroyed his own life. A week later, the court issued a temporary ruling. Ralph's house had to be listed for sale to repay damages. More than half his assets were ordered to be liquidated. The recovered funds were to be transferred to Harriet and me. Harriet received over $120,000 first. I received $40,000. The remainder would be recovered gradually, as the court finished the asset seizure. Harriet collapsed into her chair, face buried in her hands, but she was crying from relief, not pain. I wrapped my arms around her. "You deserve peace," I whispered. "So do you." "Jenna," she replied, her voice trembling. "You've carried this alone for far too long." The room fell silent for a long time. No one spoke, but something heavy finally lifted from both of us. That afternoon, I stood on a Boston sidewalk. The autumn sky was pale blue. Maple leaves drifted down around my feet. Harriet stood beside me. Neither of us needed to say anything. We simply watched people pass by, each carrying their own life, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had the right to move forward. 2. Ralph had fallen. Justice had been served. But my journey wasn't over. One question still waited ahead of me. How would I live now that I had cut ties with my old family and had to build a new one for myself? That morning, I opened my eyes in the small apartment I had just rented in South End, where sunlight spread a thin layer of gold over the pillow, and the traffic below sounded like the steady breathing of the city. No more long messages. No more accusations. No more feeling like I had to defend every breath I took. I got up and brewed a cup of chamomile tea. The warmth spread through my hands, and for the first time in months, I felt my body loosen instead of brace itself. There is a special kind of quiet that comes when you finally step out of a darkness you've lived in for far too long. Harriet had begun to heal. She sent me her first photo in years end of laughing, her face peaceful as she stood beside her new desk. As for me, Ascend Ed Labs was entering a stable phase. I had just brought on a young intern eager to learn, and it made me quietly grateful that my life finally included someone who wanted to walk beside me, not take from me. In the evenings, I spent time walking along the Charles River, learning to cook again, organizing my mind the way you clean an old room that's been deserted for too long. Some things I stored away, some things I kept, and some things I simply left it untouched. I once believed family was something you had to hold on to at all costs. But sometimes, love isn't enough to save people who don't want to change. Letting go is not betrayal. Letting go is the only way to survive. No one is obligated to burn themselves alive just to keep someone else warm. And justice, even when late, is still justice. I stood on the balcony, watching the city shift slowly into evening. I no longer wished for Ralph to change. I only wished for myself to be kind enough to keep living, strong enough not to return to the old path, and peaceful enough to build a life without his shadow in it. If you're still here with me at the end of this story, I'm truly grateful. Please like and subscribe to the channel so I can keep telling you many more meaningful and valuable stories in life. And share your own story below because your voice matters.